It's blinking. Okay, good. Right, so first of all, how much do you know of Doug Engelbart?
I think I know what most people is really the wrong word. Most geeks know. The mother of all demos. Actually, that's not true. There's also a paper he wrote that is super influential. And it's essentially the same vision that a lot of tech neuroscientists that I've met over the years, forming a community, they all want to make that the reality. And so in the sense that it's kind of hard to talk about what we mean as what a computer should be for a mind without referencing that paper, or without just referencing those ideas. So in some sense, I think a lot of people who are interested in defining a better relationship between brains and the tech that those brains have created, but now seem to be feeding back more into defining what those brains are. It's clear we knew what to do a while ago, and how to do it, and why we haven't done it are really interesting. And they can lead to like some moaning.
Yes.
Because a lot of people have made a lot of money doing it the wrong way on purpose. And a lot of people are trying to do it the right way and meeting roadblocks that are hard. Technical details, AR goggles make people look creepy.
This hair on the photo drives me crazy.
And I think, oh man, I think we're all looking for the place to work that's like Xerox PARC, that has funding, that lets us do what we want, but then actually has an impact on how the world works. Academia in neuroscience was what I did for 10 years, but it was mostly an excuse to learn the stuff I wanted to know, to say something new in this space. And now I'm transitioning. I think one of the main reasons to be in London is that there's lots of people around who can do the next phase. And yeah.
I think that's an interesting perspective. So, two things worth highlighting to you. One is what Doug and I talked about a lot was symbol manipulation. And that's really my area of passion. So that's why I made this word processor and all of that.
Yeah.
Some of it is, I mean, I will make a commercial product and all of that, but it's really a proof of concept. But the second thing is even more important. Doug had a notion of A, B, C level activities, which his daughter Christina is really championing, and I think she is right. It's been part of my philosophy for a long time, but she's kind of hammered into my head how crucial it is. And it's very simple. A-level activity is the activity a company does. Sales, research, answering the phone, talking to people, whatever. B-level is how to improve that, such as a training seminar for how to be more effective on the phone, installing an email system, etc. C-level is improving the improvement. That includes stepping back. B level, let's say you need a new communication system in the company. You write a spec, you do the research, and you build it. It's quite linear. C level is much more general and inventive, loose, unstructured. So you had some ideas of how to have competing teams build something and then share what they learn as they do it. I believe that there's a lot of B level we have to do because it's bloody obvious. However, if we don't do the C level, I think as a species we're fucked.
Yeah.
And this is where government has to do something, business has to do something, other organizations have to do something, because there are two specific areas of need, and this probably relate to you. One is the infrastructure. When Doug did his work, he owned the universe. Today we have PDF. We need to deal with that. How we can interchange networks, data, all of that stuff. It's absolutely crucial. That's related to the issue of addressability. And this is particularly something that I got excited when I listened to you. My little beautiful baby boy, Edgar, I've been watching him point. I know you have a child as well, right? It's an incredible thing. And then when we're working in a digital environment, we have retarded our ability to point. Because you cannot point if you cannot address something. Painting loosely is nothing, pointing loosely is nothing, it has to be addressable, right? So there are some specific issues, philosophical issues with that. And this also relates to symbol space. What's in the book and other symbols. So what I think would be interesting to hear from your perspective is ideas of how, sorry, this is such a long intro to you speaking, but I'm reading a book about squid,
Yeah.
octopuses rather,
The-
and how they've evolved
By
differently.
Peter Godfrey Smith.
Yeah,
He was my philosophy professor.
oh, really wonderful. He's a good writer. Yeah. So I'm reading that, as I'm sure same reason you'd be interested, is we know we are evolved creatures.
Yeah.
We have no neutral senses. So Paul Smart, what you were talking about, brilliant stuff. Now, what can we really do? How can we really push this? If Doug came back today and he had a bit of a budget, tell me your dreams.
Mm-hmm. So I think I would, the B and C, maybe this is what you're hinting at. There's work to be done in both places. It's very clear what to do B level, and my goals for the C level are sort of constrained by how much of that we could achieve. It's very vague. The structure of the mental representation, I can use many words for this, mental model, this sort of global space within which symbols are manipulated, as well as things understood by brains, is not something we have a lot of control over. It's very, very old. It's very tethered to the way our senses work, the way we are embodied. It's very exciting that being embodied very differently in the form of squid or octopus still allows you, there's still a niche or pressure evolutionarily to building a symbol manipulation system that underlies intelligence.
The embodiment is what's so exciting,
Yeah.
because so many people talk about putting things directly into the brain, and I want to slap them in the face.
Yeah.
Like, we have these amazing things with dexterity,
Yeah.
why not use them?
Yeah.
Right? So the embodiment, yay.
Yeah, no, it's a very popular domain of slight tangent, but it will connect. There's a very popular domain of neuroscience research with brain-machine interfaces, and a lot of hype around what would be possible. It is, if I'm going to be harsh about it, I think it's criminally unethical to devote a huge amount of resources to implant electrodes, which no one knows how to make stable over long periods of time, that a paraplegic would care about, instead of building an interface that records the detailed, nuanced electrical activity they already can control with their cortex on their face, to build a really beautiful brain-machine interface where the coupling is via muscles that you can still control, and yet elaborate the degrees of freedom that you have access to, from controlling your contrary, your orthopedic arm. There's no interest in that because it doesn't sound sexy. I'm recording your brain and doing stuff. And I think for those of us who have not suffered horrendous spinal cord injuries, we have, and we spend a lot of time figuring out how to control this very complex billion degrees of freedom controller. Okay, that's not true. 1,000-degree freedom controller with then an infinite number of possible states. With this reduce the words in many fields, but in neuroscience they call them synergies. Like, there's a sort of limited set of muscle combinations you can actually use to sort of carry something out. Amazingly, most humans converge on a relatively overlapping control scheme first 3-4 years of life. And then we use that to then elaborate and turn that into typing or the variety of behaviors that are demanded of us. But I think there's a really nice, there are constraints on what we can represent and also what we can control. And anything we build needs to take those into account. On an evolutionary time scale, we could potentially start selecting for people with different types of, who really like texting, and then maybe this becomes something that our brains are just sort of by default good at. But what we currently do is we force brains to use a representation and control scheme that was easy to program, that was easy to build. And they get us to use it because it taps into these really quick and dirty hacks. People like to be in touch with a lot of people, put you in touch with a lot of people, but not a really good form of contact. It's not really the communication that we benefit from. So I think there's definitely, I think the C-level thing that humanity needs should take into account the constraints of what our B-level systems actually evolve for. And rather than work against them by giving us tech that is, by some sense, easy to use, but also doesn't allow any kind of elaboration with how we could interact with it, how we could extend it. It's not really a tool. If you give even a young kid a hammer, they'll easily find 50 different things that they could do with it that are useful, and a number that are not. But it's very clear what you can do with it. What you can do with an app is exactly what the app programmer decided was possible. And maybe, if it has a bright background, you can use it as a flashlight in the evening. It's so not tool-esque. It's very much a stimulus response. Like, it's a very simple relationship for which we have to squeeze our expressibility as a manipulator of this environment, of somebody who can play around with symbols and come up with something new. The tools we have for doing that are massively limited in the last 15, 20 years.
So there are, in one way of measuring it, two kinds of problems. One is problems about the world, another one is problems about communicating with people. So
yes.
If you
I really split it into, I call it physical intelligence, which we can, I'll give you a recipe for how we can start and then extend that, and then the social intelligence, because human brains are nothing without other brains. And that's
absolutely. So what I specifically mean is, if you had the traditional nerd in a dark room programming to solve a physics equation, they will not care about the interface. Click some buttons and it happens. That's fine. It's about kind of an objective world simulation-ish. But then maybe most problems we have in the world is human to human.
Yeah.
So that's where the computer network system should be an intermediary between humans, and that's probably where the embodiment comes really into the foreground, right?
Yeah, I think there must be a way to make the process of social coordination. Language is a great way to do this with two people that are sitting in the same room. It's a little bit clunky over Skype. I say fairly clunky over when there's lag and you don't have the nuances of knowing exactly who's attending to what. It's very different for us to talk now if I'm just sitting here like this the whole time, looking at the little picture of myself in the corner of the screen. But if you didn't know that, then that's what you get.
It would be interesting to have a simulation of that, have an iPhone with their own picture while we chat.
You'll notice most 90% of people are spending 90% of the time looking at themselves. But so I think the idea of, let's say, the C-level tools that would make communication better, not just work well, but actually they actually help us come up with a better way of socially coordinating.
That's still B-level.
So making better.
B-level is anything that helps us. C-level is the effort to improve the tools that help us.
Yeah, so so better B-level tools for improving the experience of, I'm just going to say, social coordination. It can be communication in many forms. Teams, people working together, pooling ideas. They're very much needed. You can look at a few examples. Let's say some of these sorry, I actually have to take it.
I'm on silent, so my wife called twice. She breaks through. That probably means it's important. Sorry about this. I'm just asking for things. Okay. Yeah, back to.
So I think envisioning what those would look like is it's a fun task. It's how would you get a bunch of people to work together effectively solving a joint problem, and education is, I think, the easiest space to tap into.
Was it you or Paul who talked about how the layers of the cortex are basically just error correcting, so everything is as expected, it doesn't go any higher?
I think Paul mentioned this, but yeah.
Because going into, I mean, within the social space, I would also divide it into two sets of problems. One is two people or more kind of agree on a problem and agree that they should collaborate to solve the problem. And then there's Democrats and Republicans. The second one may not even be within scope. But I think there's an even harder one, and that is Democrats. Within the community that I am now, it's Hillary versus Bernie. They are making great the enemy of good. It's absolutely insane. And I know it's a traditional thing. People on the left, they are all very kumbaya, but they don't get together to solve a problem. Aren't there deep mammalian primate stuff that could help with this? Short of giving us all bananas? Or rather, are there research avenues in this space that are real?
I think how you get a lot of people coordinated towards solving a problem, towards believing in whatever, some system. The old brain mechanisms. Now these are not vertebrate old or even early mammal old. They're just early human old brain mechanisms, and we still rely on them. And I still go back to this concept of tropes, and it's not even a concept, the thing that is a trope, as well as what's the name of the author? I forget, but the one who wrote the book about there are only a small number of stories in science fiction.
Oh, right. Okay, I'm familiar with that.
And these sort of the hero arc, like he talks about there's a certain set of ingredients that are part of every story that people relate to, react to, respond to, are influenced by, and that is, I think that's interesting. Influenced a whole bunch of things. I find the slightly more mundane version, which is this phenomenon of the trope, which is there's a website which is fascinating called tvtropes.com. I don't know if you've ever encountered it, and it sort of breaks apart these small elements that are sort of the fundamental units of all the stories we know. I take this to be, from a neuroscientist, I find the number of just narrative units that we can understand is limited and somewhat small. Maybe not 10, but it's on the order of a few thousand.
So hang on. So there is this thing about we have an upper limit to, let's say, I'm telling you what my friend Paul said was referring to someone else. You know, those layers, we have a limit to that, right?
Yeah.
So if we take that as a different kind of unit, and you're talking about these so story units are as real to us as symbolic units and other units?
I would say for sure.
No, at least conceptually for this.
Sorry.
Oh, no, please come in. We're just saving the world.
Well, of course you will. What else would you do on a Monday?
Exactly. That's what Mondays are for. Right. Because my father, when I asked him many, many years ago how he defines freedom, he said freedom to travel. I thought that was a bit weak. But as I'm growing older, I understand that he means freedom of movement. And freedom of mental movement is, of course, huge in this, right? And we have many Rumsfelds, many unknown unknowns where you can't go because you don't know them. So you're saying that it would be worthwhile to look at such things because we don't have an infinite story space.
And I think one thing that we're maybe living through in the last, at least it's become talked about in the last 2 years or so, is this idea that your story space can become even further closed by sort of feeding back into itself. The echo chambers.
Digging the grooves in the brain. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think the story you tell about yourself and about how the world works doesn't have the solution in it, you're screwed. And
well, no. It depends on if your story is an answer or a question, right?
There are certainly stories that I'm not even looking for.
What I mean is, when I was talking to Doug on his 80th birthday, I said to him that what I think he's done special is not to take ownership of a solution but a problem. And that's why he had the ego-less creative exploration of different ways of using the media, which is more open than, if it's not this, I'm going to kill you.
What's interesting in many people find stories that are questions, that are sort of problems, very uncomfortable for reasons that are maybe old. It took humanity until, whatever, this is from Yuval Noah Harari's distillation of the scientific revolution, but it highlights a nice point that it wasn't until 1680 or so that it was okay to say I don't know, and to sort of live in a space which I now occupy pretty much with my daily life, which is, it is fundamentally unclear whether what I believe is true, or even what I should believe here, and that problem space of like, this is an unknown, like really That's what we say a lot about modern neuroscience now. Just hammering out what is the space of the problem we're trying to solve is really the only work we should be doing.
This is really interesting for many reasons. You all know Harari. I met him just once. He's such a clear thinking person. It's insane. This is really interesting. When I was a baby in the buggy, this is a memory I've had again and again.
Yeah.
I remember thinking, as a child, I know I was younger than 2. As a child, I could solve any question, provided the question was asked clearly. Ah, that's the problem.
Yeah.
So that's been my whole life. The reason I'm telling you now is that was not cultural because I was too young. Because you're talking about that history.
Yeah.
But there may be something else.
No, I think that's actually, this is maybe a nice way of rephrasing with the, like, yeah, a question asked clearly means it's expressed using the units of at least the representation of the people involved, that everybody can sort of be on the same page. They can coordinate. Solutions are relatively easy, and I mean, actually almost, let's say, trivial. You have the appropriate units, metrics, tropes, symbols, for which then the correctly asked question will, with maybe the right brain power, some rejiggering, some discussion, some vigorous debate, a solution is possible. And so you would now put this back into the Democrats arena. The reason that they're uncoordinated, and the reason that, say, no progress is being made, is then fairly clear, is that no one really knows what the problem is, and it's not even that they can't agree on it. Like, the problem expressed well is not really a debatable thing, unless you're willing to involve in your story, in your space.
I'm sorry. Men du är hemma och jag möter dessvärre. Kan vi snart senare? Och jag var så köra. Herregud, okej. Tack ska du ha. Jag ringer, okej. My father has to stay in the hospital. That's not good. That actually highlights something very related and important. That is cognitive space. Because a lot of things that I've noticed, and you probably have a much, well, not probably, you have a much clearer idea. So many things can shrink your cognitive space, financial worries, health, etc.
Yeah.
You know, it would seem to me that a government's job should be to help reduce the cognitive load on its citizens.
Yeah.
But then again, they may start asking questions on both different things, so I don't know. What is your notion of both cognitive load and cognitive reach?
So cognitive load, I think, is thinking of everything points to the phenomenon that your brain has limited, say, compute resources available. And anything that places a demand on compute resources, and there are lots of things to do with that generally people don't notice, which is one thing that I try to get across in other talks that I would give. You're much worse at mental arithmetic when you're standing on one foot, because some resources are spent doing the balance calculations, which for a human unstable bipedal figure are complicated. Like, it's hard if you're standing like you're taking one of the big red buses in London. They have these sort of really sporadic stopping and accelerating strategies. And many people find it's difficult to actually do cognitive work unless you can sit down. And then you're stabilized, and then you can finally start to think. Like, it's not hard to watch a Khan Academy course on the bus on their smartphone. I have countless people that I know that commute to work, but unless they have a seat, it's not worth the effort. And,
that's very interesting, because some people prefer a minimal physical load to think clearer, like playing with Lego in routine.
Okay, so this brings up like driving, okay? I think this is the canonical example is you drive, you can have a conversation, you can listen to an audiobook, and I've personally experienced done a lot of nice clear thinking on Interstate 90, driving from Boston to Buffalo, countless times going home. And most of a lot of good ideas in life happened somewhere along this 7-hour stretch. And you say, well, you're doing something. It's not like you're sitting alone in a dark room.
You get a notion of progress for free, right?
Yeah. And maybe it's even the metaphor of I'm accomplishing something. I don't need to be worrying about what I'm going to be doing next. If you think about it, sitting in a bedroom in looking up at the sky, you're constantly making the decision to stay there. Like maybe there's elements of, well, that's, now I'm thinking on mine, which is never a good idea. But I do think it's not just having to do some kind of work. I think it's going to invariably reduce the resources you have available for other activities. Not necessarily in a completely obvious, straightforward, linear way. But it also means that you, for those who like to go for a walk and have a conversation, it allows you to potentially start the thinking that you're going to be doing from a different perspective, from a different seed point in this sort of
Isn't it
complex
also a little bit about neuron synchronization? Like if you're going to throw something, they all have to get in a clock sync. So if you have something monotonous, there's like the BPM or whatever.
There may very well be, this would be a level below the sort of cognitive neuroscience that sort of reports the phenomenology and what kind of things seem to affect it, to the mechanistic, like, why is that the case? Now, at that level, for example, there are lots of theories about how many things you can keep in mind at the same time. It's sort of 7 plus or minus 2. It's not truly accurate, but it's still a good rule of thumb for how many independent units you can simultaneously hold in working memory. Those are the kind of things that are disrupted when you have to stand on one leg or you have another kind of demands on your task. Like the capacity for working memory deteriorates. It's thought that this capacity in the first place comes from how many independent times a population of connected neurons can fire. So a different group of neurons in one, what's called theta cycle. It's something that oscillates around 7 hertz. And so, it can be a little higher than this. It's like within one, I think this was 20, 30 hertz oscillation. There's lots of ideas. Within one cycle, the idea is all the things you have in mind might play out at different phases, and that's how they stay segregated from one another. If you try to cram more into them, they start bleeding on top, and therefore...
It's like three-phase power.
Potentially.
No.
How much information you can get across the channel, like it's sort of very similar. It depends on the noise of the capacity and so on. But it does suggest then you could take at the mechanistic level, are there not brain states that coordinate the sort of in phase between at least the areas that are containing the information I want to work with? If they were sort of entrained, let's say externally through alternating current, passive a scalp with a relatively low current but high voltage, could that possibly make you think more clearly about a certain task of problem that was now, and evidence from doing these kind of experiments is things happen. It's a little bit different for each person, so therefore it's hard to show, on average, you put an electrode here and here, and then people are better at creative imagery tasks. But things change in a way that we don't understand enough to make it prescriptional. But at least I think what you're saying is that there's certainly getting to the point where if we had a better rough idea of the sort of how this system works, what properties it had, and could use that to interpret the host of empirical evidence, then there are things we can do perhaps in an interventionist way with devices, but even from organizing, the interfaces we use, organizing the way we arrange space. Talked about in this reducing cognitive load, but also allowing you to focus the load that you want to absorb around the task that you care about or the conversation you're having. What would this be like to have a conversation, say, downstairs where there's 17 other conversations?
So flow is related, I guess.
I had a discussion today exactly about these. So flow is the state you want to be in as long as it's going towards the sort of whatever task. If you've correctly defined the problem, it's well stated, you have the resources, both social and physical present, then flow is an immensely satisfying experience of everything. Ideally, it's as complex a problem as you can handle that you can still resolve in the end. And it feels very satisfying. I think it's what makes cortex feel happy. Sometimes I think flow can also be you're spinning your wheels running up the wrong hill that's just getting too steep and you're not getting anywhere. We wouldn't call it flow because we're not making the progress, but the mechanisms of the brain trying to sort of run through its natural, it's not, I would say, in the field, it's not exploring possible solutions, it's exploiting an avenue. And if that's the right one, great.
So it's like the joke about the guy searching for his keys under the lamp.
Yes.
Did you lose them there? No, but it's too dark over there.
Yeah.
Or even playing a computer game. Easy to get into flow, but you're not really getting much done. Even in
Well,
the sense of the game. I mean,
yeah.
you're moving around, you're flying and shooting.
But it can be very satisfying. And if your
Yes.
computer game was a segment of code you've been waiting to write for a long time, learned a lot of things, and all of a sudden it comes together, it is satisfying. It's very cool. We all know.
Absolutely.
So I think if you want to describe the state our tools should allow, it should allow us to enter flow with the right equipment, but then also switch out of it and explore outside of where the lamp is shining to pick where we're going to focus, to move in and out of focus and recalibrate. And our tools to do that is just how we should work.
Did you talk about primates jumping around in trees and that's why I bring to difference?
Yes.
That was annoying as fuck. Because in 1991, I was in Syracuse, not far away from. And bolt from the blue, quite literally was lightning. I remember everything and I have no memory. I'm a Mac person, like, oh my god, Mac and Windows, they're both shit. It was utterly shocking, right? So I spent the next 6 months defining information to myself. The definition is something that is useful to someone or something in some way at some point. Because, you know, physics and social are very different. I then built a philosophy that I ended up calling liquid information. And your presentation utterly destroyed that. Because life kind of has to happen in liquid. I mean, we're liquid sacks walking around, right? But the higher cognitive function comes from a certain lack of mobility, because you have to deal with the fact that the branch isn't always where you expect it to be. I think that relates to your flow change notion. You can do the Tarzan thing, but then, whoops, there's a mountain.
I think so. Just say, like, people who are highly intelligent, monkeys who do really well in the trees. You have two components of this that, when they convolve together, give you a sense of this person working well, and it is the ability to sort of explore, sort of exploit the nice flow, the degree of fluid dynamics in your liquid representation of your environment that you can handle means the elegance to which you can move through this highly complex tree canopy or problem space. That is definitely something we would point to and say that is a sort of masterful use of this machine. However, if it responds slowly or poorly to a sudden perturbation, it's just not going to last very long.
You're going to fall over.
And so that's why there's this trade-off. Like, machines get really good at flow. You set the problem up correctly, they will beat you and go. But they're not. It's this the generalizing is necessary to actually live in the real world where perturbations are present. And so therefore, I think I see it as you want to eke out as much exploitability of this flow process, but still be stable.
I think that has a lot to do with the notion of cognitive load.
Yeah.
I know that I'm very creative. I went to art school and all that stuff. I'm not so good at the certain other things, but I think my creativity comes from a safety. You know, I have very loving, supportive parents and all that stuff. I know some artists have horrible backgrounds and therefore they must express themselves. But there seems to be real issues of, okay, so America has elected Trump, and we did Brexit. Crazy shit happens. And it happens because people are messy. That's just, the world is messy. And if we don't manage to erect scaffolds in society to steer us in this direction or whatever, you're not going to get there. So I'm just trying to kind of come back to the notion that there seems to be systems and things we can do to encourage certain types of behavior, whether it's highly intellectual or highly social and so on, right?
Yeah, so...
Hi.
Oh, hello.
How are you?
All
Alright.
How was your party?
Fantastic.
Great.
Best ever.
Good.
Are you setting up in here though?
Yeah, well, we're going into the room by 4.
Okay, so
Fine.
we have 4 minutes then.
Right, okay. 4:10.
Few minutes, that's great,
No,
anytime.
let me know when you guys done, but we definitely need like by 4:15.
Yeah, okay.
Okay?
Okay, thank
Cool.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
If you're going to say one thing to a Doug audience, what would you say? Stupid question, but what might be on your mind right now?
No, I would say we should be far more... I think we need to demand a reset with what tools we have brought into the world and sort of just assume are helping us. And I really would say it's the time to question everything back to a book about whether this actually helps our brains or what it was a unfortunate recapitulation to what was possible with the technology. And I'll pick on books, which were complained about by Socrates for destroying our ability to sort of exercise our memories. If you just write it down, and I'd say you were now lauded. Read to your kids. It's the greatest thing in the world. This allows them to develop their imagination, and I would say, generally this seems way better than putting them in front of an iPad that tells them. And the way I would characterize this is, if I give you a loose set of constraints, if I have some text that we've decided are symbols that mean these things, and the author has sort of laid down an interesting, compelling, engaging story, and you need to fill in the details. This is an exercise, a sort of it's work for your mind in a way that is satisfying, that we should have kids do, that can be very rewarding. In contrast to, you sit down in front of a TV or a cinema screen, and you're basically, the details are more or less for them. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more, but still, that's what Harry Potter looks like. Good luck reading the book in the future and not imagining Daniel Radcliffe as that image. It's nearly impossible. And so I think, but if we're harsh about it, you would still say, what if there are no books? It's not like people didn't create stories. They just didn't even have these guidelines and templates to go on. And I think there's a, how did you keep, clearly it has fed in the ability to store information across generations, which was more difficult in the past, or in the oral history, and it's contributed to the technological advancement of society. But there are downsides in terms of, if all of the information we get is generally a consumption at many different levels, from just text-based symbols to a VR experience of what it's like to be at a news site being told about the erupting volcano in Guatemala.
Or watching you right now.
Yeah. I think it's worth questioning all of those things. Because the media, the tools that we could create, level B-wise, allow us to actually play with it at all levels. And that would, my first recommendation is, I would say we need to really open up and rethink everything. It's not just that these things are good, reading, these things are bad, tablets. It's, what do brains want? And this is an education, this is from an entertainment side, it's from a working well side.
Doug would so agree with that. We called it Socratic authoring. Right. Yeah. And this is a true C level.
Yeah. With
experiments going up to B.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, very interesting.
There's something came to mind when you said that. That is, when you watch a TV series, you can really get in and use your imagination if you wonder what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
So that's one hook. The other hook is comedy. This is always the twist of the joke, twist of the joke. So there's got to be something that pulls you in, which is why often nature channels and stuff puts people to sleep. It's nice to see the birds, but Attenborough's going to certainly go to Africa, and then he's in Iceland, and there's no narrative, there's no question.
I find the same with watching hockey, but that's maybe beside the point. I think it's the puck moving around, moves my eyes in a way that is like sleep.
Because the thing about Socratic authoring is, what we're interested in is somehow recording an intention. And then when reading, being able to critically understand the intention context. Right? And yes, absolutely, we need to go far away from the grey printed page.
Yeah, and I think I would like to keep everything sort of, say, on the table as a thing to sort of disrupt. But the idea, what tools would I really want to do? Given what we know now, I'm not going to ever give up. Speed of accessing information is really helpful. But I want to control that tap, that's one thing. But I'm not going to give up. No, there's no going back from the internet, and neither should there be. Some of these screens are amazing. Some of these ways of monitoring and measuring my own behavior and feeding that big in a closed loop way, at least from the mouse to 3D cursor to gestures to all these things should be part of the toolkit of the future future interface between brains and their environment with other brains, and what that is going to be, I think, is not going to be the natural evolution of sort of where it's been heading.
Oh, absolutely. We need to do a reset, you're right. And to do that, we need to go back to our embodiments.
Our embodiments.
Yes.
I think, so if we continue this after they take the room, then what would this really look like? The second thing I would tell an audience, even though I was only allowed to tell them one, is I don't think this is possible to do without the tools, and I think you use the word addressable, but I would these things need to be intuitively obvious how they work and what they're capable of.
No.
And
Strongly disagree.
okay, good. I believe you need to understand. I think it needs to be the tech that is responsible for what's happening needs to be something that feels accessible. And I would love to know why.
I would modify that a little bit. Doug used the notion of a tricycle versus a bicycle.
Okay.
If you want it accessible, you have a tricycle, but you don't win any races.
Yes.
So there is the notion of how much training to get into it. But where I completely agree with you is that the basically trained user should burn as little sugar in their brain as possible when executing these things.
Yes.
So that.
But what if the basically trained user wants to say, they're sitting in front of a screen, like a lot of kids, and like, what if I wanted just to put a picture right here on these pixels? How do I do that?
Right. So
and I think there's this.
That's a great thing. So.
And it doesn't have to be in your face.
To me, it needs to be a sculpture, some kind of conceptual sculpture, right? Difficulty, Ender's Game, being able to go through whatever.
Yeah.
We need to have something tangible, but that is in a purely intellectual way tangible.
Yeah.
So you have the intellectual freedom to do whatever you want with it.
Yeah.
So that's why you may need to, just like any carpenter would have to really know how to use this tool or that tool, but in a way you can kind of string them together.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't want someone to come in, sit down, and in 5 minutes be an expert.
Yeah.
That's a failure. But they should be able to come in and get excited,
Yeah.
and then grow.
Yeah.
And then you watch them in a year and you have no idea what they're doing.
Yeah.
So I think we agree. It's just like
Yeah, yeah.
language.
No, I actually personally find my brain gets stuck on black boxes. If there's a thing in the whole tool chain for what I need to do that I can't conceive of how it could happen, I find it's de-empowering. Because for example, let's say, hypothetically, I wanted to do something different with this. If I hit a layer that is like, I'm not really sure what the hell Wi-Fi is, and I need that, then...
Do you like Harry Potter? Do you like Harry Potter?
Yeah, more or less.
I can't understand Harry Potter because you and I are having a fight. I use a wand, it does a purple thing, you go, oh. And then you do a green thing to me and I die.
Yeah.
Those are just two different color wands. I don't understand. That's a black box to me. That's why I'm putting it to you.
Yeah, fair enough. I would hope, if I lived in a world where, well, that's the thing. I would like to make it like, let's say you want an addressable environment. What that environment, I believe, should be is that your tech, first of all, we should start from the representational sort of baseline that we share with our primate brethren. And that space has to be at the heart. I think it's hard to get away from this metaphor, although as humans, we have to get away from this metaphor to do anything interestingly abstract.
It needs to be a base.
But
sure.
the base should be space. I'm at a table, I want to do something, I want the stuff that I interact with, what I touch and feel, the tech has to know that as well. So I think there's an element of, the screen works really well as a metaphor. How you move around on the screen is easy to translate, and they had the right tricycle to, now you're designing a new user interface. But I think we have the ability now, I want my tech to have space as the same metaphor, and I want to this is where we're going to start from. And then you say, well, what do I want to do? I want to draw a picture, I want to change these lights, I want to make it a bit dimmer here, I want to put on some music. All of these things should be, if you wanted to put on music, presumably there's speakers there. You should be able to just be like, those speakers.
Now you're getting very tangible.
Well, you know what I mean? It's obvious to me what it would mean to turn on the speakers. Either I go to them,
no.
or point at them.
No, by using your own language from earlier, you don't want to turn on music. You want to experience some rhythmic sound.
Fair enough.
Yes, it is the hard thing, to kind of escape what we know.
Yeah.
Right.
But what I really want to do that would help illustrate this point, right? It's remember the way I work, okay. Do we have to leave?
They'll come knocking.
For the way I would really like to work, let's say in modes. One is with people and one is just me solving a problem. Me opening a black box trying to understand something I haven't understood before. I want to, you get information from a variety of sources, past experience, things you scribble on paper, simulations you run on a computer, things you read in textbooks, and then of course the internet, as well as conversations with people. I was really inspired by, it would be great if every time I read a scientific paper I could not only click on the link to get the reference, but also to go to a list of all the times I've read the paper and what I read around that. Somehow organizing the knowledge tree that I'm doing in my head through associations was also augmented by the fact that my distributed self had at least a mirroring of that structure that I could fiddle with, adjust, and muck effortlessly. And so I kind of like the idea that, let's say I sit down to read a new paper by Doug. It's here, but then I would like to carry with it a context that is independent of the, say, space that I'm in, that's related, but can be put into that space. There's an element of, if I'm on Facebook, I want the walls all blue. Well, that's not a good example. I'm reading a scientific paper about cortex. I have with me, no matter where I am, model of the brain, papers I've read about in the past, some data that we've recorded, and maybe even a particular set of rhythmic sound vibrations that associate with different ways that I've thought about that. And I can easily modulate all of them. That is the context that my brain uses as an address for storing all that information and keeping it glued together. And I want that with me in that environment. And it's linked to both the tasks that I'm doing and the stuff that the tasks that who I'm with, what I'm working on, and then even the objects that are involved, some of which could be, say, virtual or whatever Kindle book you load up onto your phone. But it just seems like it's in the real space. It's not some holograms floating around that demand us having special gadgets. It's just in the environment. And initially it can be really, I think, for me, it would be very, very helpful to be able to sit down. I'm going to program. It's going to involve typing. It's going to involve looking at whatever IDE I'm using. But there are clues about the structure of the project. There are lists of hotkey commands that I maybe want on the keyboard or directly nearby. There are views that I want to change that don't necessarily involve some weird key press, but just like tap here. Like I want a whole sort of environment, and behind me is maybe the brief of what I'm supposed to be working on, which I can shift into view as I move to different pieces. When you describe the ability to split a document out into, it's like, yes, I want to take the book I'm writing and I want to lay it out in my fucking house. And then I want to go to the room that I'm working on now, and when I want to fold two things together, I fold two things together into a space. That's the table. It's easy to type. It's easy to add. It's easy to use voice. Do you know what I mean? Like that?
Yeah, I mean, you should be able to fold the paper by criteria.
Yeah, but I think the structure that we need to use to sort of, our brain would benefit most from the fact that you can split the information you're working on. And let's take a book you're writing with all the references, all the figures, and so on, and blow it up into the scale of space we can instantly intuit, and that is the size of a room, with the sort of second layer abstraction of the structure of the building itself.
This is where TV shows are annoying. Like every time you see Sherlock or one of those crime things, they do all kinds of lines and it's the whole block of pictures. You never see them putting it up or taking it down.
Yeah.
But you do see them talking. Yeah, no, I relate to that very much.
And I think for me it's really about like your brain relies on space, but it's largely context, so it's sort of this sort of environmental presentation of space to store information. It's part of the brain that's devoted to this. It's very, very old, at least through mammals, and I think decontextualized information is one of the first really painful things that we sort of suffer through. If you can do this with groups of people, and this is not my area of expertise, I actually usually offload this domain to my wife, who studies social intelligence, social neuroscience and development. I kind of work alone, except for other phases where we just sort of brainstorm.
When you publish a paper, that's social.
Exactly. So there's phases where I like to sit around and just talk all the time with people, but there are also phases where I love to be in a state of flow with a beer, good music, and the problem I'm trying to solve. And I would like to have the ability to work in both of those spheres. And I don't see why it's not I find every one of the tools we have now to be extremely constraining. I have to use their metaphor for how to contextualize the information you're working with. It's been layered upon and now bastardized, and now that it becomes even the medium by which we communicate through Facebook posts and
When
WhatsApp
we're
messages.
done recording here, I'll give you a brief demonstration of a few
Super.
things. My PhD is ostensibly about switching views.
Mm-hmm.
So you can either have multiple views at the same time, or
Yeah.
you have a really quick
Yeah.
and efficient way to change.
Yeah.
It's a really hard problem because a lot of things that were very obvious to me just doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. In that it's effortful for you to.
It's a little bit about the effort, but then it's the actual benefit of the alternative. It's really cool in a demo,
Yeah.
but
But
then
would you use it?
exactly.
So I would like to hypothesize without any empirical data, don't have a real mechanism for doing it, that one way we're really good at switching views is turning around. You're looking in a different frame, like, you know what I mean? Going to another room. And so there's an element of, I still feel like I empathize with, if I want to see my outline on a different scale, to be able to look up and be like, that's the whole thing. And it's constant there. It's in your peripheral vision. You can see how shuffling through, rather than as a scrolling sidebar, it sort of moves overhead.
The way we have,
Maybe that's the wrong metaphor for everybody, but there's.
the way that I put it in author
Yeah.
is on the trackpad you pinch,
Mm-hmm.
and everything except headings are on the screen.
Yeah.
So that's one way you can
Yeah.
do it, but you don't actually need to go out that often. So what I'm looking into is ways where in that view you can choose to have all names visible, because you don't look at an overview to look
Yeah,
at an
that's interesting.
overview ever. You
Yeah.
look to find something,
Yeah.
right? And also when you're scrolling back in the document, all people and all companies will be replaced by pictures. Like if you look for
Yeah.
BMW, you see the logo, not when you're reading, only when you're going backwards, right? So ways to shift so the representation fits what you actually want out of it.
Yeah, no, that's cool.
Yeah, there are many interesting things there, but it needs to properly relate to this thing.
I think as a design principle, the little we know about the basis of the neural representation of the environment we're in is a really good guide. And if you try to fight against it, well, humans have been roughly fighting against it for a long time, but they've been standing on top of what the primates got really good at, and then added this wonderful symbolic manipulation abstraction ability. But it was manipulation of that basic representation. And I find, as much as I would love to be in a place of building tech or software or interfaces that facilitate the amazingly uniquely human ability to sort of manipulate abstract forms to create new understanding and new insights.
In
It
3D
has-
space that they are in.
And yes, it needs to respect that, and the fact that the tools we have now violate the basic contextual spatial organization of information our brains need.
How many my brains, there you go. How many monitors do you have in your office that are used by you?
I have just one large
I
one.
usually like that too. I'm just thinking the house we're moving into, which incidentally has exactly the same blue color as the door in my little office. I think I'm going to have to stick more monitors around to test this.
Interesting.
Because yes, you can command tab. But that's a very different thing, like you're saying, than having different.
Go for it.
And also maybe something as simple as doing this does different blood flow to the head than if you just do this.
But as we came even in the talk, like when you turn your head, right? It's a huge amount of information about expecting what you're going to see based upon how fast you're moving, how the world works, and you're making a huge prediction, and it is a change of context. Like there's an element you're sitting around a group of people, but like if we work in a particular way, maybe we take a break to make a tea, go to the kitchen, or
Some kind of interruption.
some kind of interruptions. You move to another space. Maybe you go to a coffee shop to work on one kind of thing, you go to your office for another, and somehow I really wish, I don't know.
Well, you've got to
Like
break those
that's
cycles.
if it's programming. I'm not using this because I think you know what I mean. It's just more like that's what I've been doing a lot of recently. But there's an element like I'm gonna run a debug build, and I'm gonna go through this. Like there's a. If I've just been finishing an algorithm, and then in the exact same context, I'm clicking through breakpoints. I'd almost like to just go and sit in another chair. It's a debug chair. And at that space these are the sort of traces.
Well, this is the problem with a universal Turing machine. You tend to do everything in one box. You don't have to move around.
Exactly. So I think this is where I would say in the reset. Moving around is I feel like is a freebie way of giving your brain control over the view it has, both in physical way, like physical, but as well as contextually. It's what we generally, if you want a new view, you can go look out the window. And why that isn't a gesture for getting access to different information beats me. And I think there's a way of like, you could do it all here. Isn't it clearly more convenient to Alt-Tab? But your brain has to do the same effective thing if you switch between Stack Overflow and your text editor.
Yeah.
That it has to, you're making your brain do the work without giving it any of this like structural guidance that it would otherwise have had access to.
Yeah, so what you're saying is that, you know, as we talked about last week, you're using the occipital lobe to augment the prefrontal cortex, but that is not all you're doing. You're also, the movement of your muscles, context, everything else influences what you see.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, getting rid of that rectangle is very important. I agree with you.
I think it's,
But also, there's a lot you can do there. You know, like Richard Feynman doing his diagrams. He is thinking there that we can make it more magical, right? We're more than 1/4 past. Let's be nice to them and go downstairs.